Senor, I don't know, no, Farid. I was just lying.
I'm in a hurry.
I don't know.
I will slit your throat.
Hey, what's up everybody? It's Prone here and welcome to the latest episode of Prone's Picks. On today's episode, I'm going to be counting down my top 10 favorite A24 horror films. Now, for those that don't know, A24 is a very successful independent American production company known for producing and distributing film and television. The type of content that they back is often art house, experimental, and quite challenging films. They're known for crossing over genres, and today we'll be talking about mainly horror films, but it does cross between horror sci-fi, psychological drama, horror thriller, that sort of thing. Now, I know that a lot of you are quite passionate about these films that I'll be talking about today, especially some of the big ones. So if they do get left off the list or they're ranked a little lower than you would expect, please don't crush me in the comments. Or, you know what, crush me in the comments, I don't mind. I love the film banter, I could do it all day. But enough of the BS, let's get down to business. Coming in at number 10, we have the demonic horror film from 2015, Blackcoat's Daughter. It's directed by the son of Anthony Perkins Osgood and stars Emma Roberts, Lucy Boynton, and a pre-Sabrina Kiernan Shipka. The film was about two Catholic schoolgirls who are left behind at their boarding school during winter break, where the nuns are rumoured to be Satanists. There's also an escaped mental patient on the loose, trying to make it back to the same school, but for what reason? The tension and narrative build nice and slowly, and the film has a really good payoff that it doesn't spell out for you. I also really dig the reason behind the demonic possession, which I found to be quite original. The pacing and ambiguous narrative may not be for everyone, but I still find Blackcoat's Daughter to be a solid piece of brooding demonic horror. Coming in at number 9, we have 2019's psychological horror gem, Saint Maud. Maud is a PS nurse who becomes dangerously obsessed with saving the soul of her current patient, a former dancer and socialite now dying of cancer. First-time director Rose Glass does a fantastic job in what has to be seen as one of the strongest horror debuts in recent memory. Saint Maud has the look and feel of some classic cult 70s films like Let's Scare Jessica to Death or Reflection of Fear, even some of Polanski's work. There's great performances, it's beautifully shot, well paced, coming in at 90 minutes. This is a big recommendation for me if you haven't seen it, and it's definitely one of the best horror films to come out within the last few years in my opinion. Now, my number 8 is another psychological horror film. We have 2017's It Comes at Night. After a mysterious plague leaves the world in a post-apocalyptic state with a few survivors, two families begrudgingly share a home in order to survive. The already uneasy alliance becomes threatened when fear and paranoia begins to take over. Now, It Comes at Night really suffered from poor marketing in my opinion. The poster made it look like it was going to be some kind of post-apocalyptic monster flick in the same vein as like A Quiet Place, instead of a psycho-human drama full of paranoia where the real monsters are the humans. I'm a big fan of writer-director Trey Edward Schultz, and the themes explored in this film are very similar to his other gem of a film, also brought out by A24, called Waves, which I highly recommend. And just like the film Waves, we're dealing with a domineering male patriarch, toxic masculinity, mistrust, and questionable morality. Anyway, I think that this film is severely underrated, and my rewatch bumped it up several notches. I think it's only going to grow in stature as the years go on. Now, coming in at number 7, we have our first Robert Eggers film, 2019's The Lighthouse. Two lighthouse keepers, played to absolute perfection by Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, tried to maintain their sanity whilst running a lighthouse on a remote New England island during the late 1800s. The Lighthouse at number 7, you say? I know, don't kill me. Look, before I did my rewatch, I probably had it in my top 3, if I'm being honest, but the latest rewatch wasn't that kind. In saying that though, there is still so much that I love about this film, so let's get into it. First off, the film is technically insane. The cinematography is absolute perfection. The choices that they made to shoot in black and white, the aspect ratio, the framing, the use of surreal imagery and editing all add to the nightmarish claustrophobic paranoia that the film conveys. Where the film does lose me a little bit though is with some of the heavy dialogue scenes during the middle act. I find some of those scenes to be just a tiny bit repetitive and some of the dialogue to be a little bit grating. Fairly minor issues though, as I still find the film really engaging and worth watching for the cinematography and Lovecraftian vibes alone. Coming in at number 6, I have what I imagine would be a lot of people's number 1, Ari Aster's masterful debut, 2018's Hereditary. The film is about the matriarch of a family passing away and the family dealing with their grief. Strange things start occurring though, and the family begin to uncover terrifying secrets about their ancestry and impending fate. Now, this is one film that I didn't feel the need to revisit for this episode. I've seen it twice since it's come out, and honestly, it is just that brutal and traumatic that I feel like I don't need to watch it again for at least another decade. Now, I can totally see why this is a lot of people's favorite A24 horror film, and Toni Collette's amazing performance is enough to warrant that opinion. It's hard to believe, once again, that this is a director's first feature film, given how technically brilliant it is, and just how great a performance he gets out of his cast and crew. Now, I guess my main issue with the film is the pacing in the first act. I feel like maybe they could have trimmed a scene or two there. This is really minor issues though, because the way this film builds up to that final act is absolutely brilliant. It is so brutal and traumatic. It's an absolute masterpiece, one of the best final acts I've ever seen in a horror film. Now, I'm really sorry that this film didn't make the top 5, guys. I know you guys love this film, but to be honest with you, I've got 5 coming up that I think are even better. Coming in at number 5, I have Robert Eggers' debut feature film, 2015's The Witch. In 17th century New England, an exiled Puritan family builds a farm beside a remote and sinister forest. When their newborn son mysteriously vanishes and their crops fail, the family begins to turn on one another. Accusations of witchcraft and lies make them vulnerable to the true evil residing nearby. Before I started rewatching films for this list, I had The Witch at number 1. I just love this film so much. I love the attention to detail with the production design, the costume design, the century-appropriate dialogue. It is masterful. The cinematography is not overly flashy, nor does it need to be. The lighting and color grade add to the sense of foreboding dread that lingers over the film. The performances are also as good as it gets for a horror film. Game of Thrones veterans Ralph Ineson and Kate Dickie are amazing as the Pierce parents. The 2 kids playing the twins are annoyingly fantastic. And then we've got Anya Taylor-Joy in the role that basically catapulted her to stardom. On this watch though, the thing that I noticed most of all was the score. Composed by Mark Corvin, its minimal use of haunting medieval violin, frantic strings, it's off-kilter, unsettling and edited to perfection, making the horror beats hit that much harder. It's another confident debut feature, which is truly a testament to A24 and the belief that they show not only with directors in general, but first-time feature directors. Now, I know that The Witch probably isn't as polished as The Lighthouse, but for me, it's better paced and more of a straightforward horror film, hence it being so high on the list. Coming in at number 4, I've got the latest film released by A24, Ty West's Backwoods horror jam, X. During the late 70s, a group of aspiring filmmakers set out to make an adult film in rural Texas under the noses of their strange elderly hosts. When their hosts catch wind of what's going on, the cast and crew find themselves in a desperate fight for survival.
What?
Okay. If you know me at all, then you know that I am a massive Ty West fanboy. 2007's satanic panic horror flick House of the Devil, and then his follow-up slacker horror comedy The Innkeepers, are not only two of my favourite horror films of all time, but the reason why I got back into watching independent horror films. When I first heard that Ty West was teaming up with A24 to make a horror film, my head almost exploded Scanner style. I feel like Ty was making A24 type horror films before A24 even existed. I guarantee that Eggers, Astor, and even Jordan Peele would be fans of West, especially House of the Devil. Just like House of the Devil, West nails the look and feel of the period, making New Zealand look like backwoods Texas during the 70s. I love the correlation between sex and horror in this film. The way that sex is talked about and portrayed is very refreshing and something that you're not likely to see in most genre films these days. Films about making films are a real soft spot for me, and whilst they are out there making a porn film, the cast and crew do have larger aspirations in mind. The director, fresh out of film school, even references French New Wave at one point, which is hilarious. And that is another highlight for me, the dialogue in the film. West has a real knack for writing unforced natural dialogue, so it feels like we're watching real people rather than a bunch of walking tropes or cliches. He's the king of mumblecore horror in my opinion. This is also a testament to the really strong cast. Scott Mescudi, aka Kid Cudi, is absolutely terrific. Brittany Snow gives a career best performance. Jenna Ortega is about to blow up, seriously. After this and Scream, she is just on fire. And then we have Mia Goth, who is an absolute force of nature. She does dual roles in this I didn't even realise until the end credits. She is that good. West also doesn't mess about when it comes to the horror either. It's really well paced and things are subtly introduced through some cool editing and transitions, and then shit really hits the fan in the second half of the film. There are some brutal kills in this one, and it is definitely not for the faint of heart. Now, I know it is only April, but this is my favourite horror film of the year so far. It's probably going to be in my top 3. I don't know what's going to top this one, to be honest. And it's also one of my favourite theatre-going experiences of the year as well. Alright guys, here we are. Only 3 to go. And coming in at number 3, we have 2013's sci-fi horror flick, Under the Skin. An extraterrestrial disguises itself as an attractive human female who drives around Scotland trying to lure unsuspecting men into a van. Once there, she seduces them and then sends them to her home dimension where they're then processed for their meat. Probably the most crazy and ambitious story of all the films on the list, Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin really has to be seen to be believed. In fact, reading the synopsis now just sounds insane to me. I could only imagine what the pitch was like. Now, this film definitely won't be for everyone. The dialogue is minimal. The cinematography, sound design, and editing is experimental and reminiscent of a lot of art house films. For me though, this only adds to the experience and it really gives you the alien's perspective. The sound design in particular is used to great effect in that regard. The mixture of staged actors and unsuspecting people being filmed really works and adds a sense of unpredictability and dread to many situations. ScarJo really puts herself out there and gives a career best performance in a super challenging role. Watching the alien's journey, trying to navigate the new world, its initial lack of empathy or emotion, and then subtle subsequent changes is something that I've never actually seen before. It's done in such a haunting yet beautiful way. The film is visually and sonically dazzling, it's tragic, it has layers of subtext and horrific on multiple levels. Also, Sandstorm gets played during a scene, so it's basically a must-see. At number 2, I have Ari Aster's sophomore feature, 2019's cult horror masterpiece, Midsummer. Danny, suffering from a recent traumatic event, travels with her boyfriend to their friend's hometown in Sweden for their fabled Midsummer Festival. What begins as an interesting holiday retreat soon takes a sinister turn as the cult's true intentions surface and relationships are put to the test. I almost made this list without revisiting this film, as the runtime does seem quite intimidating and excessive, but I am so glad that I did. I loved it even more on rewatch and had no problem at all with the runtime. In fact, I even watched the director's cut. The sheer scope of this film is absolutely insane, and the cinematography is impressive on so many levels. The fact that they shot this film in 99% daylight would have been challenging to say the least. I love the framing in this film, especially during the wide shots where Aster tends to let a lot of dramatic scenes play out. There's great artistic symmetry on display with how things are framed, the way the camera moves, and also the attention to detail with set and production design. It's truly a beautiful looking film. The sound design is also really well done. It's minimal in the right parts and progresses really nicely as the horror unfolds. They also use the cult's chanting and singing well, and there's also plenty of scenes without dialogue, which adds to the sense of isolation and peace, or dread, depending on what your take is. Now, as far as relationship horror goes, this film is at the top of the pile. It really nails what it's like to be in a one-sided relationship. Definitely not a good look for selfish males and just passive-aggressive beta types in general, as the group of male friends, with the exception of the Swede, are straight up horrible people. Probably not the best first date movie if I'm being honest, right up there with something like Possession. The obliviousness of the group of men really adds to the darkly humorous undertones throughout, as their agendas and ignorance when observing and reacting to the cult and their rituals is hilarious. Now, I won't say too much else in case there are those few out there that still haven't seen the film, but I find the final act to be as absurd as it is horrific, yet beautiful and ultimately very satisfying. It's another one of those films that is chock full of subtext and ambiguous enough to warrant many different theories. And isn't that why we watch films in the first place, to be challenged and discuss these sorts of things? Well, I know that's why I like to watch them. Anyway, not only is this one of A24's best films in general, it's also one of the greatest folk horror films ever made. I think it is right up there on par with The Wicker Man. Well, we finally made it all the way up to number 1, guys. So here we are. My number 1 favorite all-time A24 horror film is 2017's Killing of a Sacred Deer. A brilliant surgeon, Stephen, played by the great Colin Farrell, takes a strange teenage boy Martin under his wing. Things get pretty insane though when Stephen and the family discover that Martin has a sinister agenda of his own. Now, I'll just start off by saying that the first time that I watched this film, I actually wasn't that hot on it. Needless to say though, it completely clicked for me on rewatch. Now, it's also really funny that the top 2 films on a horror list are actually so darkly humorous, as well as being quite horrific. The direction given to the actors with their monotone delivery and lack of emotion is absolutely genius given what happens with the narrative. It's the sort of absurdity and tone that's a real calling card for A24. I like that the film challenges the whole ideal family trope and the human striving for what modern society would call perfection. The hypocrisy of the system and society, along with the whole sins of the father theme, really worked for me. Now, I initially saw this before I started film school, so I didn't understand the levels of technicality involved with making the film, especially the cinematography. There's so many slow zoom-ins to slow zoom-ins, weird angles and wides that it's almost like he's taking the piss. It totally works though, especially with the dialogue delivery and the symmetry with the tracking shots in the hospital. It's just plain masterful. Look, I know that this is a pretty controversial pick for number one film, given the quality of films that have come before it. But for me, it's just the cast. They give such amazing performances in this, it would have been very challenging. It's also darkly funny, it's tragic, it's horrific, and ultimately pretty satisfying. It's the film that I've thought about the most during my rewatches, and that is why Killing of a Sacred Deer is my number one A24 horror film of all time. Well, that's it, guys. Thanks for sticking around for the full episode. Now, I'd just like to give a shout out to a couple of other A24 horror films that are of real high quality as well that didn't quite make the cut. Last year's film Lamb, starring Noomi Rapace, was really weird and fun. Climax was pretty close to making it, and 2016's The Monster is also a really solid film. Now, I guess that I need to address the elephant in the room, which is, where the fuck is Green Room? Now, I absolutely love Green Room. It's one of my favorite A24 films. And even though there is some violence in the film that borderlines on gore, I feel like it's way more of an action thriller type of movie. Anyway, that'll do it for this epic episode of Prize Picks. I hope that you enjoyed the episode. Feel free to destroy me in the comments. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. I hope you have a fun movie-filled week. I'm Prone. I'll catch you next time. Peace.